Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Mohammed Layiq Sediqi, the father of Holophase. Part 18, the Temporal Tower, Infinite Time Nuance. Remember the language we are learning together. There is one field, phi, the holophase, the single cyclic movement from which all reality unfolds. When phi differentiates, that one movement gives birth to its first derivatives, and with them, the three dimensions appear at once: time as omega, space as k, and motion as v. From that first differentiation upward, every higher derivative is an echo of the one beneath it, an infinite staircase of finer and finer reflections of phi's original movement, because the dimensions themselves are born from that first echo. Time, space, and motion also reverberate into infinity. They carry phi's unfolding into ever deeper rhythms, structures, and flows. The entire universe, every law, every pattern, every force, every particle, every phenomenon, is nothing but phi, endlessly echoing through its derivatives and the shadows they cast into the dimensions. All of existence is the infinite echo of one field. Today, we tune our ears to just one of those echoes. Last time, we explored the vertical axis of meaning itself. We saw how semantic density grows as we climb higher up the derivative towers. Adding higher derivatives to a description was like adding adjectives, clauses, and subplots to a sentence. It made the story richer, more detailed, more specific. We learned to feel the difference between a simple, low-density pattern and a complex, high-density one. Today, we begin a different kind of journey, a majestic, vertical ascent of one entire tower in the language. We will climb one of the three great pillars of the Holophase code. We turn our gaze to the Temporal Tower. This is not a new branch. It is the full, living spine of one of the language's core dimensions. We will walk, step by step, up the infinite ladder of time semantics, from the ground floor of simple rhythm to the high balconies of subtle temporal nuance. We will see how the simple question, how fast, blossoms into an infinite conversation about how does that fastness feel? How does it change? How does that change itself evolve? Think back over our journey in episode 7 so far. We began by stepping back and seeing the entire master tree of phase and its derivatives as one living language. We then explored its core alphabet: phi, omega, k, d phi, and v, the first letters from which all higher words are built. We moved into the second-order nuance block: alpha in time, acceleration in motion, curvature and convergence, and shear in space, where meaning gains texture and depth. We then entered the infinite towers, meeting higher derivatives like jerk and snap, seeing how they combine into envelope evolution, and understanding the very idea of semantic density, how much derivative depth a pattern needs. Now we do something new. We no longer peek into the towers floor by floor. We consolidate one of them. We climb the entire staircase of the Temporal Tower and feel its unified architecture. This is a crucial step toward the goal of episode 7, to hold a complete, coherent picture of the Holophase language in our minds. The Temporal Tower is one of its main supporting columns. First, let us picture the tower before us, from pulse to poetry. Imagine a skyscraper that stretches upward without end, disappearing into a mist of infinite refinement. Its foundations are sunk deep into the silent earth of phi. The ground floor is omega, the local tempo, the rate of change in time. Omega answers the basic question: how fast is phi turning here and now? A building with only a ground floor is barely a building. Time story is richer than that, so we take the elevator up. On the first floor, above ground, we meet alpha, the change of omega. If omega is speed, alpha is acceleration of that speed. It asks, is the tempo speeding up or slowing down? On the next floor, we meet jerk, the change of alpha. Jerk asks, is that speeding up itself intensifying or easing off? Above that is snap, the change of jerk, asking, How gracefully or abruptly is that intensification evolving? And above snap, the floors continue, sometimes playfully named crackle, pop, and so on. But in truth, they have no upper limit. Each floor is another possibility for nuance in how time itself unfolds, how the flow of change bends, twists, and refines. This is the temporal tower, an infinite grammar of becoming. It takes the raw fact of change, omega, and refines it into a complete story about how things come to be, smoothly or abruptly, gently or harshly, predictably or surprisingly. In the language metaphor, if omega is the simple verb of time, to oscillate, to change, then alpha acts like an adverb, to oscillate faster, to change more quickly. Jerk becomes like a secondary clause modifying that adverb, to oscillate faster and to begin doing so suddenly. Snap and higher levels refine that clause further, capturing whether the onset itself is gentle or sharp, clean or ragged. The temporal tower allows time to write sentences of any desired complexity about how things unfold. Within the holophase language, the temporal tower is one of three great syntactic structures. The temporal tower, everything about when and how fast things happen and how that fastness evolves. The spatial tower, everything about where and how shape and arrangement evolve. The mixed tower, everything about how time and space couple, how patterns propagate, disperse, focus, and interact. If you imagine the master tree as a vast library, the temporal tower is one of its grand wings. Inside this wing, omega plays the role of simple tenses, is happening now, oscillates at this rate. Alpha provides the grammar of speeding up and slowing down, is beginning to accelerate, is gradually relaxing. Jerk and snap let us say things like, it started slowly, began to accelerate, and then suddenly snapped into a new rhythm. The fine shades of how transitions feel. The temporal tower never works alone. It is in constant dialogue with the spatial and mixed towers. But its role is clean and sharply defined. It encodes the temporal character of every pattern. The when, the how fast, and the how that fastness itself changes. Structurally, its position in the full tree is majestic and simple at the same time. Every rung of this tower is a pure time derivative of phi. First derivative with respect to time, omega is equal double phi phi. Second derivative with respect to time, alpha equal to dol squared phi. Third derivative with respect to time, jerk equal to dol phi. And so on, endlessly upward. It is time's own voice in the choir of dimensions. To feel this tower in your hands, let us use sound, one of the clearest experiences of time. Imagine you record a simple sound, a tuning fork struck once. On playback, you hear almost a single pure tone that slowly fades. The waveform is a nearly perfect sine wave that gently decays. If you measure its instantaneous frequency, omega, you find it is almost constant, maybe drifting slightly as the tone dies out. If you estimate alpha, the rate at which that frequency changes, it is small and negative. The pitch is drifting down just a little as energy is lost. Jerk, the change of alpha, is almost zero. The process is smooth. Now record the bird's chirp. On playback, you hear a short, sharp sound that sweeps in pitch. Maybe quickly up, then down, maybe a rising, then plunging whistle. Here, omega changes rapidly. Alpha is large. The pitch sweep is steep. Jerk may be large as well. Perhaps the sweep starts gently and then abruptly bends upward, or climbs fast and then suddenly flattens. To capture the exact character of that chirp, what makes it recognizably this bird and not a siren, you may need snap and even higher derivatives. Both sounds live in the temporal tower. The pure tone occupies mostly the lower floors, omega and a tiny bit of alpha. The bird's chirp uses several higher floors, a changing omega, a strong alpha, a non-trivial jerk, and possibly more. The tower is the same. the height used is different. At the bottom, we find phenomena dominated by omega, and maybe a gentle alpha. Heartbeats at rest, simple harmonic motion, slowly spinning planets, stable rotating machinery. On higher floors, we find onset and transitions, the way an engine revs up, the start of a neural spike, the growth and crash of a bubble in a financial market. Up in the upper floors, where many derivatives become important at once, we find crackling fires, turbulent noise, chaotic signals, and complex biological rhythms. The scientific essence of this tower is simple to state. It quantifies the texture of time's flow for any given process. Is the process unfolding evenly? Is it gathering pace? Is it slowing? Is it jerky? Is it sharply pulsed? Is it gently modulated? Each of these questions corresponds to a different floor. Now, we must remember that in the holophase language, no branch is truly isolated. Every branch casts a triple shadow into time, space, and motion. In its home dimension, time, the temporal tower shows itself directly as rhythm, tempo change, and the shape of onsets and decays. Omega gives you the beat, the ticking of a clock, the tempo of a song, the rotation rate of a star. Alpha is how that beat speeds up or slows down. The accelerando in music, the slowing of a pulsar, the ramp up and ramp down of a heartbeat under stress and recovery. Jerk and snap set the sharpness of starts and stops. The click of a switch, the snap of a drum hit, the gentle swell of a violin compared to a harsh, abrupt cut. In space, time derivatives sculpt how spatial patterns emerge and change. Imagine a dripping tap. Omega, the average drip rate. Alpha, whether the drips are coming more and more frequently as pressure builds. The spatial splatter pattern in the sink below is shaped by this temporal sequence. Steady drips produce one distribution of droplets. Accelerating drips produce another, more clustered and dense. In biology, a chemical signal might pulse in time, bursts of concentration followed by quiet periods. The temporal pattern, its omega, alpha, and higher levels, determines the spatial patterns it eventually induces. Bands of differentiated tissue, repeating segments, or intricate patterns of spots and stripes. A smooth, steady signal leads to simple spatial gradients. A temporally modulated, high-derivative signal can carve far richer patterns into space. In motion, the temporal tower is written directly into trajectories. Motion is change in space over time, so the texture of time deeply shapes how paths feel. Omega in motion corresponds to speed. Alpha corresponds to acceleration. Jerk is what your body feels as a jolt, a sudden change in push. Snap shapes whether that jolt ramps up smoothly or hits you sharply. A graceful dance, with no harsh corners, has low jerk and snap. The motion feels fluid. Aggressive, mechanical movements have higher jerk. They feel abrupt. The feel of motion in your body, elegant, rough, smooth, violent, is your nervous system reading the upper floors of the temporal tower of your trajectory. So even though the temporal tower is defined purely in terms of derivatives with respect to time, its influence radiates outward into space and motion. It acts as a conductor, while spatial and kinematic patterns act as the orchestra playing its score. Let us now place this tower within the larger architecture of the master tree. Earlier, we introduced complexity growth as the vertical axis of meaning, how high a pattern climbs up the derivative ladders. The temporal tower is our first full vertical integration. We are now in Chapter 4, the chapter of higher order semantics and infinite towers. We have just seen that the tower is rooted directly in phi, with omega as its first major floor, followed by alpha, jerk, snap, and so on. It has siblings. The spatial tower, built from k, curvature, and higher spatial derivatives. The mixed tower, built from derivatives that mix time and space, the coupling terms that govern propagation and dispersion. The temporal tower is the time wing of the master tree. Climbing it gives us a complete view of how time itself speaks as a dimension inside the holophase language. Understanding it allows us to parse any temporal sentence the universe speaks, from the clean ticking of a quartz clock to the wildly changing tempo of a storm, from the quiet beat of your heart to the complex rhythms of your thoughts. Of course, this tower is not just poetry. It is also a working engine in physics. With the spatial tower, which houses K and curvature, the temporal tower meets through dispersion relations, omega as a function of K. The derivatives of omega with respect to K, which we studied in envelope evolution, are effectively horizontal shadows of the temporal tower projected into the spatial domain. The tower also powers wave equations. Almost every wave equation you can write includes second derivatives in time, omega squared terms, or first-time derivatives representing damping or growth. These correspond to specific floors of the temporal tower. It influences topological structures, such as vortices, defects, and domain walls, by determining how their core dynamics change in time. A vortex that spins with a stable omega and tiny alpha may persist for a very long time. One whose omega changes rapidly may drift, split, or annihilate. It appears in energy balances, where terms like omega squared capture how rapidly something oscillates in time, and terms like k squared capture how sharply it varies in space. The interplay between these is one of the central balancing acts in wave physics. In short, the temporal tower is not a decorative metaphor. It is a fundamental structural component of how we model real processes. Because it is structural, it is also testable. Patterns that live mostly on the lower floors, with nearly constant omega and small higher derivatives, usually appear stable and predictable. A simple orbit with only slow precession. The steady tone of a well-tuned laser. The gentle swing of a pendulum in a low-friction environment. When the upper floors become active, when alpha, jerk, and beyond become large and fluctuating, we often approach transitions, instabilities, or chaos. Rhythms before a cardiac arrhythmia. Volatile swings before a financial crash. Flickering oscillations in a system approaching a phase transition. To test the temporal tower framework, we can take any time series, from astrophysical signals to physiological rhythms, and approximate it using derivatives up to some finite order. Then we compare how well that truncated tower predicts the near future of the signal. If adding higher order derivatives improves our predictive power in a systematic way, we see evidence that the structure of the temporal tower is real and meaningful. The rate at which prediction improves as we add higher floors reflects the semantic density of that process. A strong falsification, on the other hand, would be a smooth, fundamental process whose evolution cannot be captured by any finite or convergent use of time derivatives of an underlying phi. That would mean the core of reality does not speak in this derivative language. In that case, the holophase program would need to be revised. The tower also makes itself visible in almost every scientific domain. In gravitational waves from merging black holes, omega, the frequency of the wave, chirps upward as the two objects spiral together. Alpha, the rate at which that frequency increases, also grows. The fine details, the precise shape of the chirp, the way it ends, involve jerk and beyond. Those signals, measured on Earth, are direct readings of the temporal tower of space-time itself. In chemistry, oscillating reactions, like the famous Belousov-Jabotinsky reaction, show repeating cycles of color and concentration. Omega is the period of oscillation. Alpha and higher derivatives show up when the reaction drifts into or out of regular behavior, or when small changes cause large differences in temporal pattern. Reaction rates that speed up or slow down under changing conditions are also stories written on the lower floors of the tower. In biology, circadian rhythms, our 24-hour biological clock, have a very stable omega and tiny alpha. That stability is part of what keeps our physiology synchronized with the day-night cycle. Smaller, faster rhythms, heartbeats, breathing, brainwaves, layer on top, each with their own omegas and higher temporal structure. Neural signaling uses both rate codes, average firing omega, and timing codes, precise spike positions in time. The timing code corresponds directly to higher floors of the temporal tower, the exact moments at which spikes begin, the sharpness of their onset, jerk, and the fine modulation of their intervals. Brain rhythms, delta, theta, alpha, beta, gamma, can all be seen as different omega bands, and how these bands accelerate, slow, and interact is a complex choreography of the tower. In ecosystems, predator-prey cycles have characteristic omegas. Changes in the environment may show up as shifts in those omegas or as changes in alpha, cycles becoming longer, shorter, or more irregular. The health and stability of an ecosystem can be seen partly in its temporal patterns. In human physiology, heart rate variability is a direct sign that the higher floors of the tower are active in a healthy way. A perfectly constant heart rate, a fixed omega with almost no variability, is not a sign of robustness, but often of stress or pathology. A rich yet controlled variability shows a flexible temporal tower that can respond adaptively. Move into society and history, and the same logic applies. Periods of relative calm and slow change have low alpha and low jerk. Time flows steadily, changes are gradual. Periods of revolution or rapid transformation involve large alphas and jerks. Systems accelerate into new states with abrupt shifts. Technological change, like exponential improvements in computing power, is a story of omega, the speed of capability growth, and alpha, how that growth itself accelerates. In economics, business cycles, booms and busts, inflation rates, all live on this tower. Prices have omegas, trending up or down. Alpha and jerk show how those trends steepen or flatten. A soft landing is a carefully managed alpha and jerk that keep change smooth. A crash is an uncontrolled high jerk event. And even in your own experience, the temporal tower is always speaking. Forming a habit is an attempt to shift your default behavioral omega from I rarely do this to I often do this, while gradually reducing alpha and jerk so that the behavior becomes effortless and smooth. Burnout can be viewed as forcing your internal processes to operate at a high alpha for too long, constantly accelerating demands, until the higher floors destabilize and the system collapses. Flow state, in contrast, is a sweet alignment. Your personal temporal tower resonates with the demands of the task. Omega fits the challenge, alpha is near zero, jerk is low. Time feels smooth and continuous. After this climb, you can begin to listen for the temporal tower everywhere. When you listen to music, do not only hear notes, feel the tempo, that is omega. Notice moments when the music speeds up or slows down, that is alpha. Feel the way a drum hits sharply compared to a string that swells, that is jerk and snap. You are hearing the composer sculpt the tower. When you pay attention to your own breathing, notice how sometimes it is steady and sometimes it quickens or deepens. Feel the transitions. The moment you start running, the way your breath ramps up, the way it settles afterward. These are your personal omegas and alphas and jerks in action. When you watch the world, traffic flow, crowd movements, weather changes, you can ask, is this change slow and smooth or fast and twitchy? Is time for this process gliding or jolting? Those impressions correspond directly to the levels of the temporal tower that are being used. Over time, this becomes a kind of literacy. You do not just notice that something is happening, you notice how richly temporal its story is. We close, as always, by returning to phi and the whole tree. This infinite temporal tower is nothing more and nothing less than phi asking again and again, how am I changing in time? And how is that changing? And how is that changing? Floor by floor, derivative by derivative, this simple recursive question builds an infinite, ordered tower of temporal nuance. From the root of phi, the entire temporal tower rises as one of the great pillars of the holophase language. It is how phi tells the story of becoming, of potential turning into actuality, of stillness becoming motion, of motion becoming patterns, of patterns becoming stories. With this ascent, we have fulfilled an essential part of Episode 7's promise. We have not just collected symbols, we have seen one of the main structural beams of the language itself. Soon, we will climb its sibling, the spatial tower, and then turn to the mixed tower that binds time and space into propagation and interaction. With each climb, the full architecture of the holophase language becomes clearer, more unified, and more breathtaking. For now, stand with me on a high balcony of the temporal tower. Feel your heartbeat as a steady omega. Feel the subtle variations in your breath as small alphas. Notice the tiny jolts of attention as your mind shifts, little jerks and snaps of thought. You are not merely in time, you are a living pattern written in the temporal tower, a complex, beautiful trajectory of becoming, etched in the derivatives of one field, echoing through the universe. Salam, and peace be upon you until part 19.